Welcome to episode 8 of It's About Data, the podcast about data, AI, and analytics, and whatever. It's starring Matt Housley. He's the CEO of Half-Pipe Systems, and Tony Baer, principal of DB Insight. And today, here on episode 8, we're going to review our takeaways from SAP Sapphire 2025. Take it away, Matt.
Tony, welcome back. I mean, virtually anyway, but my understanding is you just got back in town last night from
Nope, I got back. It's a longer story, which is that Newark is very messed up.
Oh,
And I was
okay.
supposed to fly back last night, but the weather and the times just came moved back and back and back. So SAP was generous enough to check me back into my hotel room, the same exact hotel room, and we just got here like about maybe an hour and a half ago.
Oh, okay. So are you sleep deprived? That should make this interesting.
Of course, which means that this will be it's about data unplugged.
Okay, perfect. That's what we want. We want the hottest of hot takes here. So, yeah. We'll see if you get invited back next year after whatever we say.
That may be questionable after this broadcast, but we'll have to just chance it.
Okay. So yeah, you made a few LinkedIn posts about this already. Let's kind of kick off with top level themes. One of the things you mentioned before we kicked off the podcast is SAP Business Data Cloud. But yeah, start at the top.
I think at the very top, it's how SAP is describing itself these days,
Yeah.
and it came from literally from the top, from Christian Klein, CEO, which is that we're no longer just an applications company. We're
Yes.
applications, data, and AI, and they're all basically playing. They're equally prominent. More to the point, a subtext of all that, which they also said, is that applications are going to get commoditized. And so that really puts a lot of where SAP is putting a lot of the value add or basically claims the value add is the context of the data and the processes and the connectivity. And then from all that, of course, you don't have, you with good data and good processes, good context, you get good AI. So that's how SAP is really pitching their value prop. So it's very significant that data is now basically becoming again a first-class citizen at SAP.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that because SAP has always been about data storage, right? Like having this data and all these applications. And yet somehow, I think what I'm gathering is that maybe the analytics of that data kind of took a backseat to just the transactional aspects of that data.
Well, yeah, with transactions, essentially you're kind of taking that part for granted, but it's also looking at SAP's legacy architectures, where you had all this ABAP code that was basically that was embedded in to these very proprietary data clusters that use basically databases like Oracle as a file storage system. Didn't really use them as a real database. I mean that's before the current generation of S4 HANA, which is now. Which basically does follow modern design principles and is on a database, but it's the HANA database.
Yeah. And I just want to interject. We're not going to go off on this, but
No.
I just want to point out that IBM has the same problem, right? We talked about IBM recently, lots of legacy code, not modern databases. So maybe we can talk about that on a future episode.
Sure. Yeah. I think some top impressions is one, how SAP is basically positioning itself, and data is now first-class citizen. And as part of that, and part and parcel, is the Business Data Cloud, which was only introduced to the world back in February. It's only a few months, and yet when I was on the floor, I was just hearing a lot of buzz from customers and from partners. They're very excited. And to me, what's the key to this is, well, one is that SAP with Business Data Cloud. Well, of course, before that with DataSphere, they're saying they're opening up to the outside world. But it's really the first time that SAP has literally gotten its data act together, literally. And then they've gone across their full spectrum of applications. So we're not just talking about S4, we're also talking about like Ariba, Concur, all those basically those line of business applications that were part of the SAP portfolio. They each had their own data models. And what SAP has done is they've harmonized this into kind of like a single, into an Uber, Uber is my term, but they call it one domain.
Yeah.
But now and within Business Data Cloud, and this answers a question that you and I were talking about just before we started recording. It's
Yes.
being packaged as data products in the full sense of the term. In other words, a product that basically has the pipelines, the governance, the life cycle management. So they're actually what they will have. They've promised by the end of the year to have at least 500 some odd data products, and these would be basically essentially data assets that you can then basically choose from essentially in a catalog and use in Business Data Cloud. Now, of course, the secret of all this. I mean, obviously, with the data product, SAP has set up the template. It still is up to the customer to obviously populate them, but that's a
Yes.
huge jump start there, and it's a very different from the SAP of old. And I think
Yeah.
that's also why there's just so much excitement with Business Data Cloud. Of course, a number of the partnerships that they've announced. I mean, Databricks was the first one. Interesting, interplay of cultures there between basically a young company and a 50-year-old company. And so I won't go any further than that. But they also have partnerships with Colibra, Adobe, and also with some of the consulting firms as well. Also with Moody's for financial data. And another interesting point of all that, so it's a good start to a web of partnerships. SAP is clearly looking to build up an ecosystem by being more partner friendly than it's ever had any reputation for being. When I say partner, they've always been friendly to SIs, but not necessarily to ISVs.
Right. Because in general, my understanding is that historically a big part of SAP's business was to come in with SIs and do integration, right?
Right.
Like there was just that was part of the core model. And now they're
Exactly.
saying, we're going to make it easier to interoperate with us. So it's
Right.
not a huge, huge project when you want to do this interop because it's kind of pre-built interop with Databricks, with Moody's, with other data partners.
Right. Well, the thing is that this year is with Business Data Cloud is where it came together. I mean, they've been putting the pieces in place. I mean, a year ago they talked about DataSphere, and
Yeah.
before that DataSphere, there were the separate components of SAP Data Warehouse Cloud and SAP Analytics Cloud. And with Business Data Cloud, they brought all that together. It's really the logical culmination of all that. With DataSphere, that put them in the position to launch Business Data Cloud. Of course, along with that, they then had to do the homework of getting their one domain model together, and that was a huge effort.
Yeah. So okay, I do want to expand on this theme, which is related to everything we're talking about. And this has to do with a LinkedIn comment I made earlier today, and that is culture.
Yeah.
And I think SAP as a company has known for a long time that they had a cultural problem in the sense that they're this very established company, very large business, very successful, but they were kind of alienating younger engineers, newer startups. Like they were not skating to where the puck was going. They were kind of going backwards culturally. And another specific example of this is they acquired Qualtrics, which is a Utah-based company that does surveys online, in order to modernize, and basically the acquisition failed. Right, Qualtrics is now, I think, owned by private equity, but it got spun back out because it just didn't work out. And so, from your perspective,
But they're using Qualtrics pretty heavily right at this point.
So there's still an integration there.
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what broadly, like, what is your sense of what's happening with SAP's culture? Have they made progress in terms of cultural modernization from where they were a couple of years ago?
Well, put it this way, it's obviously with an organization like that, and IBM has a similar
Right.
challenge.
Yes.
You have a certain tone that's being set from the top,
Yeah.
but it does take time to really percolate through. And of course, their customers are the most. When I say conservative, I don't mean from a political standpoint, but conservative
Right.
from like a cautious standpoint.
Agree.
That you do not, when you have accounts payable, you do not want to upset that overnight with some new basically snazzy agent because it's sexy. You need to try it carefully. It leads into another number of other issues there.
Yes.
But the thing is that it also is about getting the field organization in sync. And of course, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. So it's an ongoing process. There's also, of course, the elephant in the room, of course, with the upcoming sunsetting of support for ECC, and that's really, and from my discussions with folks, with people on the floor, especially with I spent a lot of time with the big SIs and asked them like, what are they hearing? Now, of course, part of it being an SAP event, this may be a bit self-serving, but they're saying they're not really. I mean, they're not seeing this modernization thing as being an opportunity where customers might say, "Well, I have to blow things up anyway. Why don't I consider another alternative?" What I was hearing in Orlando was that's really not the case. I don't know if that's a representative sample, but
Yeah.
the fact is that there's certainly, for as much of a challenge as it is to go from ECC, to the more modern, basically the business suite, S4, and all that sort of thing. Yes, there's certainly going to be a fair amount of heavy lift. Probably nothing compared to the heavy lift, if you were looking at going to another monolithic suite. On the other hand, there might be some organization that might say, "Hey, well, maybe we should just start going to all these little we'll just do Workday for HR, for HR or ECM or whatever." But what I'm hearing there at this point is, my sense at this point is that probably the path of least resistance would be to essentially go on the modernization path. And there are a lot of, obviously, it's going to be a huge slog because a lot of architectural issues. I mean, and I think, the one with the most contention is clean core, which is separate all your customizations from the core code, which is
Yes.
easier than it sounds.
Oh,
And there are going to be a lot of nuanced basically responses to that. And it's something which is just not going to happen overnight. And for a lot of customers, it's really judging what's the mix of strategies, the greenfield, which is going to clean core, or the brownfield, which is kind of like wrapping that legacy architecture. There'll have
yeah.
decisions to be made.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And this leads us right into another topic, which is agents. You mentioned it already. A lot of the conservative customers are very resistant to the idea of using agents or really anything brand new or even, a decade old in some cases. What is SAP's message on agents in terms of a modernization tool and in terms of an application tool?
Well, they're going to say, look, we are treating this very seriously. And by the way, we're not going to call just anything an agent. We're not Salesforce, where we're saying like we have like 3,000 agents in Agentforce, or Microsoft is saying that I don't know how many countless thousands, tens of thousands, or even maybe in the six figures that their customers have developed, with Copilot and 365 or whatever. SAP is being very deliberate. They are basically saying that agents are going to are spread throughout the suite, but actually, it's really starting, I would say, in a more of an incremental fashion, because the first step is really sprinkling Joule, basically your digital assistant through the suite. And in some cases, that digital assistant may just be a simple chat bot. In other cases, it might eventually, essentially, kind of evolve into an agent. And SAP's message is really saying, even though they're saying that there are going to be agents, and I think there's a big question, and it's nothing that I think any of us really know the answer to right now in terms of whether agents are going to become the de facto basically face of enterprise applications. But by virtue of the fact that SAP is saying the applications can be commoditized, that tier is going to be commoditized, really more than implies that the intelligence that goes in front of the application, whether it be a digital assistant or something that's even more ambitious, such as an autonomous agent. There is that in the future, but it will be an evolution.
Yeah, which totally makes sense. I mean, honestly, from my perspective, this is somewhere where I really prefer the conservative approach. And I'm going to put a pin in two topics. We won't go too deep on these, but we may have separate episodes on these in the future.
I think so.
And the first is what I'll call the 90%, or let's call it the 10% problem. The 10% problem is basically that agents and LLMs in general are great when your answer only needs to be 90% correct.
Yeah.
But that last 10% is really, really hard. And when you're like traditional SAP code or COBOL code, it needs to be like 5 nines correct. Yes, there are always bugs, but like when you're managing people's social security checks or accounts payable, that cannot get messed up. And I'm sure that's what a lot of SAP customers are talking about right now. So we'll come back to why that's a problem for agents. And then I also want to talk more generally about the modernization problem with things like COBOL and SAP, maybe in a separate episode. Why is this really hard?
Yeah. But just to get to your 90-10 point, what SAP's response is that we are fine-tuning the models. We are choosing, I mean, the models that are in Joule, even though you as a customer will give you your choice, the models that we prescribe are going to be heavily fine-tuned on or basically trained on SAP data. And SAP is basically taking a fine-tooth comb. of course, it's subject to, of course, the cautions that you have with with any approach with generative AI, which is that nothing is going to be 100% perfect. There are certainly ways that you can contain or limit the hallucination. But yeah, that certainly is I think a very key issue on SAP and its customers' minds. And SAP is basically their message is saying we're going to be very deliberate about this, and we are going to have agents, but we're not going to have 5,000 agents overnight.
And just almost, thrown out there haphazard, like Google, Microsoft, a variety of players are doing.
Well, it's a whole different point. I mean, basically, if you're general purpose or your developer environment or B2C, it's a much different game than when you're dealing with basically a B2B application that's dealing with a lot of the back end processes by which companies are audited, taxed, held liable. So
exactly,
I would basically expect that the SAP is going to be very deliberate in its pace and its message there.
Yeah.
Even though they are saying Joule will be all over the place, but the digital assistant is another story.
Right. And I know Data.World, for example, I was talking to them probably a year ago, and they said that they were using, they had like a SQL generator that was an LLM, but it's designed to say, hey, here's a possible query. Why don't you try it and tell us if it works? It's not like, oh, we're just going to go run this query automatically. Yeah. There's kind of a layer of human feedback that goes into it. And it sounds like Joule is a very similar situation.
Yeah, exactly. I still just want to end, though, with the fact that just how powerful a message that SAP is making about data at this point. That to me, of course, maybe I have my own parochial view, but that was really my big takeaway.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, excellent. I'll have a restream, like kind of a rerun, like the old days before Netflix, of our previous SAP Databricks episode on LinkedIn at some point, probably before this episode actually goes live, because I think that fits right into the themes we're talking about here.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Excellent. Well, yeah, great to talk to you again. And we will meet again next week with hopefully another exciting topic.
See you soon.
Take care.